QSO Today episode 251, Mark Ziegler, WA2ILB. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers for the radio amateur. ICOM is ready to enhance your contest season beginning with the ARRL Field Day in June. And by QRP Labs, Hans Sommer-Geezer UPL's QRP Radio Kit Company. Hans has an amazing catalog of radio kits and parts for every budget. I want to thank both ICOM and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. I want to express my condolences to the family and friends of Fred Cady, KE7X, who passed away on May 16th. Fred was an author, mentor, and my guest in episode 192 of the QSO Today podcast. May his memory be for a blessing. Mark Ziegler's ham radio story began as a youngster that moved him into a career as an electronics engineer with the famous Bell Laboratories. Now retired, Mark enjoys operating from an RF quiet QTH in rural New Hampshire. Wind power is WA2ILB's alternative energy source, and is one of the subjects that we discuss in this QSO Today. WA2ILB, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Mark?
Yes, I am, 4Z1UG. Eric, I'm here.
Thanks, Mark, for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started in my grandfather's living room. He had a large console Stromberg Carlson all-wave receiver, and he noticed that I was over there listening to it quite a bit, listening to foreign broadcasts and amateurs. And later on, he suggested, he says, I know someone, a friend of mine, that is a ham, and would you like to go see his ham station? And of course, I jumped at the chance. Come to find out, it was Les, K2JTU, who was also the postmaster in my hometown. One evening, my grandfather took me over there, and Les had quite a station. He had a Viking Valiant with the SSB adapter, a HQ-170 receiver, and my eyes just lit up. I couldn't believe it. And make a long story short, after that, I set up a time with Les to go study for my novice test. And once a week for about 2, maybe 3 months, my grandfather would take me over there one day a week to talk with Les, practice Morse code, and find out what amateur radio was all about.
And what was the hometown?
Milford, New Jersey, northwestern New Jersey, right on the Delaware River, just south of eastern Pennsylvania, but on the New Jersey side. Would
that be considered a rural area?
Yes, it was mainly dairy farming country with a little bit of industry. The Regal Paper Corporation had a number of mills on the Delaware. And
were there a lot of hams in Milford?
There was only one other ham, and that was K2SUG. Bill, I can't remember Bill's last name right now, but he worked down in Princeton on one of the Stellarator projects down there for, splitting atoms.
So here you are learning with Les, and when you got your novice license, how old were you, and what year was that?
Yeah, I was 15. That was in 1959. The license arrived the 1st of October, 1959. Boy, I'll tell you, that I think was about 6 weeks that I waited for that license to come. That was the longest 6 weeks of my life.
Now, what was your call sign, your novice call sign?
WV2ILB. So I've had the same call sign essentially for the last, in October it'll be 60 years.
When did you upgrade?
I upgraded, I had to upgrade within a year. I upgraded in 1960. I think I upgraded in July. I went down to take the general test in Philadelphia because you had to present yourself at the Federal Building, and you had to take the test in front of an examiner, both CW and theory. And I passed the CW test the first time because I did take it twice. I passed the CW test the first time, but I missed the theory by just a question or two. But then you had to wait I believe it was 90 days.
Before you could take it again?
Yeah, it was. I'm not sure on that. It might have been only a month, but you had to wait and then go take it the next time. So I did. Again, passed the CW test and also passed the theory test. But it's nothing like the way the tests are given now. I mean, there were no multiple choice questions. There was a question, and you gave a written answer. And also, too, you had to know different electronic circuits and what each component in that circuit was used for.
You had to draw a Colpitts oscillator, for example.
Yes.
Or a Hartley oscillator or something.
Exactly, and then you had to indicate what each component was, why it was there.
I think I remember. I remember some of this. I think it was for my general in '73. I think it was. It may have been multiple choice by that time. You know, it's funny. I don't remember. Were you active as a novice?
Oh yes, very active. I couldn't get enough of them. In fact, my parents would complain that I was spending maybe a little too much time and not enough time on my schoolwork.
And what was the novice rig?
It was I constructed it from an article in the 1956 QST by Lou McCoy, and it was a single 6146 master power oscillator, crystal controlled. Of course, it had to be for, back then it was novices had to have crystal control, and it generated 75 watts input.
Right, which was the legal limit for novices in those days.
That's right.
Right. There's a little bit more history to this transmitter, isn't there?
Yes. Well, to celebrate my 50th year in amateur radio, I reconstructed, a new one of those transmitters because, I thought it would be a nice thing to do. And now I must say the reconstruction was a lot better than the original.
And why was that? Were you using new parts or surplus parts in the first one?
Well, I used a lot of surplus parts. The transformer came out of a junked TV chassis, and a lot of the parts were ones that I picked up at some of the Hamfests and things like that in the area, and my Elmers gave me. And all I had was a crank type drill, a nibbler, that I could nibble aluminum with.
Nibbling tool.
The nibbling tool, right, and a Weller 2-heat soldering gun. Let's put it this way: it was pretty crude, and there was a lot of holes that didn't need to be in the chassis. Or
did you have any problems finding the parts to build that 1955 era transmitter, like tube sockets and transformers and? No
problem with that. The thing that I looked for the longest was the power supply filter choke. I could not find an exact replacement, so I had to go with one that was a little less, was not quite as high an inductance, but I substituted a little bit more output capacitance to get the filtering properly.
Before we go on, are you on a cordless phone?
Yes, I am. I do not have a landline.
Are you on are you on an old cordless phone, like a 49 megahertz cordless phone?
No. This was a Spectrum.
Oh, because I'm hearing like it used to be in the olden days when the ham radio operators would talk on on 40 meters and they were getting into the phone line.
Yeah, that's the crosstalk coming from our phone system up here in the Great North Woods. I'm out just about at the end of the phone line.
I see. So anything that could be transmitting along the line there might be getting into your phone. Okay.
Actually, no. I had the phone company up here to investigate, and it's actual crosstalk from a neighbor across the street.
I see. Okay. Well, you know what? It is what it is.
Yeah.
This is podcasting. So, podcasting, I'm sitting in my upstairs office in my house, and the dogs bark and the door slams, and my wife yells up the stairs, and that's podcasting.
Yep.
You've upgraded by this time. You're a 16-year-old, which makes you in 10th grade probably when you have your general class license. Were there other kids in the school that had ham radio licenses that you shared your ham radio experiences with? Did you have a system of buddies there?
There was one other amateur in my high school, and that was, I can't remember his call right now. I remember his name. That was Dan Murcell. He lived in Kingwood Township, which was about a 6-mile drive from where I lived. And we became quite close friends and, talked to each other or did Morse code, because still at that time, after I upgraded, I didn't have the funds to get into phone yet.
Did you have a VFO for the rig after you upgraded, or were you able to build a VFO for it?
I was able to, yes. I was able to scrape together enough money to get a Heathkit VF1 VFO. I built that and put it on the air, and I had the worst chirp you ever heard in your life.
And was your Elmer able to help you resolve that?
Well, actually, I was able to resolve it. I noticed I had it open, and I noticed when I keyed it, there was an WA2 regulator in there that would go out. And I eventually traced it down to the fact that the series resistor for that WA2 regulator wasn't a low enough value to keep that voltage regulator in regulation when you key down.
So you fixed it, and the chirp went away.
Yes.
Once you were a general, and also from your time as a novice, did you decide that? Did you have an interest in chasing DX, or did you just like to just make contacts and it didn't matter who?
Well, initially it started out, I was just happy to talk to communicate with anybody at all. And then later on, after I got my general, I got some other crystals for the novice transmitter. It was an 80 and 40 meter unit, and then I started to work some DX on CW. But shortly after that, I was able to save enough money from a paper route, and I also was a business or a job that's going out of business. I was a pin setter at a local bowling alley, made a whopping 60 cents an hour.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Oh, yes, it did, very much so. I became very, very interested in electronics, and I ended up going to a 2-year technical college in Washington, New Jersey. And during toward the end of the second year there, they arranged for recruiters from AT&T Bell Laboratories to come in and screen us, give us tests and like that. And so a few weeks later, I heard back from Bell Labs that they wanted to give me an interview.
Well, that's pretty cool. So what happened?
Well, I had a choice. There was 2 different locations. One was in Whippany, New Jersey, and the other was in Homedale. And I didn't care which one, but I had relatives that lived down in the Homedale area, and I chose to go interview there. And long story short, again, I interviewed and got the job. Well,
that's pretty cool. And what was the job at the Bell Labs? What did you do there?
I was a technical aide. I got the job in the data transmission department. I was a technical aide there, and I would assist the engineers to construct prototypes and do some experiments and things of that nature. And then eventually, I went to Monmouth College. Ended up becoming an associate member of technical staff, which is an engineering degree, but it meant that you went to night school and like that.
No, I've spoken to more than a few of my guests over the last almost 5 years who worked at the Bell Labs, and from what you say, the Bell Labs had multiple locations. Was amateur radio an active part of Bell Labs' life?
Yes, we had a very large amateur radio group there at Homedale, and we had our own station up in the top of one of the elevator towers, a tri-band Mosley beam on top with dipoles for 80 and 40. And also, too, there was a very active moon bounce group there, the Crawford Hill, which was co-located just a little bit away up on Crawford Hill, where they would do moon bounce work, and I got involved with those guys. That was a lot of fun.
And now this message from ICOM America. With the Dayton Hamvention in the past, we are moving quickly to the ARRL Field Day and contest season. Take the ICOM IC9700 along on your field day to work VHF-UHF modes, including single sideband and CW, and the digital modes. Why not demonstrate moon bounce or meteor scatter to your assembled club? The IC9700 is ICOM's newest SDR transceiver that is fully operational in all modes on VHF-UHF and 1.2 GHz. This full-featured rig includes color touchscreen, RF direct sampling on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and independent dual receivers capable of duplex operation on your favorite passing satellite. Power output on 2 meters is 100 watts, 75 watts on UHF, and 10 watts maximum on 1.2 gigahertz. Of course, this rig can be remote controlled over the Internet with an optional Ethernet interface and software from ICOM. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants both in his shack and on his field day site. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out the faintest signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that will change the world's definition of a software SDR transceiver. This rig, too, has independent dual receivers, allowing you to be ready to pounce on DX or contest stations in one band while working another. Finally, the ICOM IC7300 has changed the definition of the entry-level HF transceiver. This compact footprint that almost exactly matches the IC9700 also includes RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, and real-time spectrum scope or pan adapter. ICOM America has the rig for your field day tent or ham radio shack that matches every amateur radio operator's level, skill set, and ability. Be sure to visit your favorite ham radio store to take a look at these fine rigs in action. Click the ICOM image on this week's show notes page to get to the ICOM America website. I want to thank ICOM for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Remember, when you buy your next ICOM rig, please be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO Today. Was amateur radio, did it have an influence on the approaches that engineers took at the Bell Labs? Did it affect the culture?
I didn't notice that at all. But a lot of the hams that were there were very very smart people. I don't know if you remember Jerry Sepik, W2FMI. He essentially wrote the book on ballons and onions and all of that. He's produced a number of books. He worked there at the home Bell Labs.
When I was growing up, the Bell Labs had this mythical quality for any kid that was interested in electronics and telephones and radio. So I thought perhaps maybe they're, given the number of hams that were at the Bell Laboratories, perhaps the can-do-it attitude that ham radio operators have transferred to the Bell Labs culture.
Well, most of the people that I knew at the labs, and I knew quite a few, whether they were hams or not, they had that can-do attitude. They were very inquisitive and very, very into what they were doing. They really enjoyed it.
Now, I ran across in doing a little bit of research for this article, I see that your name is on a patent from the
Yes.
Bell Laboratories. What was that patent for?
This was an analog modem that was used to it would receive touch tone signals from a touch tone telephone, and then it would respond back with a serial data stream to a computer. Another serial. It had the serial modem built into this unit, and they used it. It was used for credit card verification.
Oh, well, that's very clever. The clerk would use the touch tones to enter the credit card number, and the data coming back would be the
right. And there would be a display on the unit that the clerk had that would either approved or denied. This was a very early one of what they're using now. But the interesting thing about this modem was, though, it was the first product that I worked on that actually made it into production that used the microprocessor. And it used an 8080. And that 8080 actually detected the frequencies of the touch tone characters and translated them into digital signals, and the microprocessor actually determined the frequency of the tones, and that's
early signal processing, right?
Very early digital signal processing, correct? But it was one 8080 that did two separate modem functions at the same time.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. Well, we don't, without that long perspective, we don't realize that the processors that we carry around in our smartphones today filled a room in those days, right? In terms of processing power, even more so. Yeah.
Well, the first project that I worked on was to design a circuit that would replace a card full of small-scale integrated circuits, digital integrated circuits, with a microprocessor, some memory, and some logic, so that we could shrink the number of parts and also the cost of this circuit board. And it was a 4004, and I had I think I had four 4-bit bytes of random access memory, and I think it was 16 bytes of ROM to program this circuit, and it was a lot of fun. That was the first microprocessor I ever coded, and that was all machine code. That was all done with ones and zeros.
Now, did the Bell Laboratories have a lot of projects that never made it to market? Was it like a pure research place?
It wasn't pure research. It was research and development. And most of the activities at Homedale there was, there were some pockets of research, but most of it was development of products for the Bell system. And a lot of the projects, for one reason or another, didn't make it to production.
Can you think of any unusual projects that didn't make it to production at the Bell Labs that you could talk about?
Yes. One of the projects I worked on was the remote reading of electric, gas, and water meters over the telephone lines. And we got to the field trial stage down in Houston, Texas. It worked. It worked great. They would interrogate the given meter over a phone line when, at night, when the phone line was likely not to be in use, and it worked very well. The only thing I could figure that killed it was the fact that at the time, the electric, gas, and water companies actually did not know how much it cost them to read each meter, and they thought that the 50 cents per meter per month was too high.
How were they reading the meter? Were they counting pulses?
We had an interface that would activate when when DC voltage was applied to the phone line, and then it would report the meter reading back, as a serial data stream. Very very low frequency, like 300 bits per second.
I see. But in terms of reading the meter, there was some kind of something that went over the meter face that would actually count the pulses every time the dial went around?
Yes, there was I forget what it was. That was, I can't remember now, but I believe there was a reed switch in there that did that, and that was accumulated by the by the memory unit in the interface.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing because nowadays I think in most cities, at least electric and water is being read by remote control.
Yeah, this was back in the late 60s. 67, 68, 69 was when we were working on that.
And how long did you work at the Bell Labs?
I worked there for 25 and a half years, up until January 1st of 1990.
And then what happened?
I retired.
So you've been retired since 1990?
Yes, right.
Oh, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I retired at the ripe old age of 45.
And what did you do after that? You moved to the sticks and...
Moved up here to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. I did have, for a while, a computer consulting business up here that I helped get the resorts and businesses up here into the 20th century with personal computers.
And what's on your ham radio workbench?
You mean equipment-wise?
Do you have a ham radio workbench, and what kind of projects have come off of it?
Yes, I do. Well, one of the things that came off of it was the novice transmitter, but I mainly use it for repairing existing equipment that I have when I need to do that, or I don't really construct any what you would call major projects. They're all just odds and ends. Need new jumper cables and like that. I haven't. I used to do a lot of building back when I worked at the labs, but I haven't done hardly any since.
What's the current rig?
Well, I have two current rigs. I have a Yaesu FTDX 5000, and I also have an ICOM 7610.
You sent me a couple pictures, and then I saw a picture on your QCWA site. And there's a power amplifier in a 1972 picture that appears to be the same power amplifier that's sitting on the desk next to the FTDX 5000. What is that? Yes,
that's a Drake L7 amplifier. Back around 1980, early 1980s, I think I may have mislabeled that as 72, but it was about 82. That picture was taken. And that was a complete Drake 7 line. I had all the accessories and everything. I even had the RB75 digitally synthesized VFO for it, which is quite a rare item these days.
Do you still have that?
Yes, I do. It's down in the basement in storage on shelving.
Oh, I see. You don't pull it out, or do you pull it out for special events?
No, I don't. It's something that I'm going to leave to my son, who is also a ham, and I'll let him deal with it.
Yeah, good for you. What's your favorite operating mode?
Sideband. Although I do CW on occasion. When the ARRL had their 100th anniversary and had their special call signs in all the states and territories and like that, I worked them all on both sideband and CW.
Do you chase DX?
Oh yes, I really enjoy that, and because I moved up here to New Hampshire back when I decided to upgrade the station here to my my retirement station, I decided I started over on my DXCC. That was in September of 2012, and so far I'm up to 273 right now.
Well, that's pretty cool. And you do that mostly on single sideband?
Mostly on single sideband, although occasionally if there's a rare one that I need and I see him on one of the clusters on CW, I'll switch over to CW and do it that way.
Do you work any of the digital modes?
I have in the past. My thing with the digital modes was I says, yep, it works. I used it for a little bit, and I said, okay, been there, done that, and moved on.
Now, I see that you also are a big supporter of DXpeditions.
Well, yes, I have supported a few.
Do you like working them? I mean, do you stay up all night and try to work them on all the bands that they're available on, if you can?
Well, I try to work them once, at least once. But if the opportunity presents itself to work them on multiple bands, then I will do that. All depends on the provocation, and I'm not a night owl, so I don't do much amateur radio at night.
So your favorite bands during the day are 20 meters?
Oh, my favorite band is 17 when it's open. But here back during the last sunspot cycle, the maximum, of course, 20 through 6 meters would have openings. In fact, I've worked Europe on 6 a number of times, and 10 meters, of course, is fantastic. I was fortunate enough to get my amateur license during cycle 19, a really big one back in 58, 59, 60. And I can remember working Cuba on a 5-watt AM rig and a wire antenna, if you can believe it. And it was a Gonset communicator 6 Goonie box.
Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO Today. I've had a few guests on the QSO Today podcast who said that during Sunspot Cycle 19, you could work the world with a wet noodle.
That's exactly right, and you didn't need hardly any power at all. If you could put out 3 or 4 watts, QRP, you were good to go. And your antenna didn't have to be anything fantastic either. I only had wire antennas back at that time.
Now, I noticed the pictures on your QRZ page that you've got a wind turbine. It looks like it's holding up maybe some ends of some antenna lines. How useful is wind power up where you live, and how do you harness it?
Well, it's a commercially made unit that's rated at 2.5 kW in an 18-mile-an-hour wind, and it hooks into if it's generating more power than my house is using, it pushes it back on the grid and makes my electric meter run backwards. One thing I'd like to add is that we lose power quite a bit up here, usually half a dozen times a year, commercial power, and I have an emergency standby generator that is all automatic and picks up the whole load of the house.
It starts up automatically. Do you get snow up there?
This past winter, right here at this location, we received total snowfall was 230 inches.
Is this wind turbine part of an electric company offering? I mean, is there a tariff in your state that allows the grid tie of these wind turbines, and is it part of a bigger project?
Yes, there is a tariff in the state here. The power company allows this hookup. Actually, I think it's a state law, but the wind turbine belongs to me. I paid for it and paid for its installation.
Has it paid for its use? I mean, does it generate enough energy that over a period of time you can actually show that it pays for itself?
It's just about to, and it's been up there close to 15 years. It's too long for a payback. Having it to do over, I wouldn't do it again.
I see here that we have a program for solar power, and the payback is 5 years if you have enough panels on your roof.
Well, that's very good. I looked into solar power, but we only get up here where I live, we only get 100 days of sunshine a year, so it's really not practical.
And what's the antenna system there?
You were mentioning about the antenna connected to the wind turbine tower. That is a 40-meter ZEP. It's end-fed with homemade 600-ohm open wire line. It's 66 feet long. The feeder is 33 foot down to a 1-to-1 choke bound, and then about a 35-foot length of coax into the shack. And it works very well on 80 meters also, sort of a lazy L. It works on 80, 40, and I worked quite a bit of DX on it on 15 meters when 15 meters has been open.
Well, to make it work on 80, do you have to short it at the top or something like that to make that a lazy L, or does it just work that way?
No, it just works that way. The combination of the total length of it is 99 feet, and then the choke balun and the coax coming into the shack evidently does a fairly good impedance transformation where my equipment can handle it pretty well. The 20 through 6 meter antenna is a 4-element step IR at 58 feet.
And what do you think of that antenna?
That antenna makes its own propagation, I'll tell you. It is absolutely an amazing piece of 21st century technology.
No, I've never seen one of those, but I've heard that it's kind of like the elements are like tape measure tape, like steel tape.
No, they're actually phosphor bronze, and they are have a slight curvature widthwise to them, and they have holes in it that stepper motors engage and run the antenna out or shorten it up, however, for whatever frequency. There's a controller that controls the stepper motors on the reflector, the driven element, and the two directors. Once you get it set up, it remembers the settings for the various bands. Also, my transceivers are tied into it, so as I change the frequency on the transceiver, the antenna automatically adjusts to the proper length. So it's essentially I've got a monoband, 4-element monoband antenna on 20 through 6 meters.
Now, do these elements, do they go straight out, or are they looping back like a trombone?
Yeah, I don't have the trombone elements. I don't need them for 20 through 6. If I wanted to work 30 or 40 meters with it, I would need trombone elements on the driven element and one reflector. Because
the elements would go out too far, right? They go out on 40 meters. They'd go out a quarter wave.
Right.
Right. So they fold it over.
Yeah, they loop back around,
mm-hmm.
And I know people at hams that have them. I've talked to them, and they say they work very well.
Yeah, amazing. I've had quite a few guests, I think, that have the step IR, but I don't think I've ever stopped to ask them about it. But they've got a new antenna out that caused me to read the review and try to understand a little bit better. And I think that sounds like a cool option for people that can have a beam above the house.
Yes, they do have a new one. I can't remember what it's called, but from my experience with step IR, anytime I've had a question or needed something from them, they handled it very, very quickly.
What's the Garden State Amateur Radio Association, and what's your role in it?
Well, nothing anymore. Back in the, back in the early 70s, a bunch of us were on 20 meters in the area where I lived, there in Monmouth County, and we got talking about forming a radio club, and somebody said, well, the Garden State Amateur Radio Association used to be around. Well, evidently it had been defunct for about 5 years or so. So we eventually got together and ended up getting the, taking it over, and also getting the W2 call sign. So and it's been going now since about the early 70s.
Are you still active in it? Or I guess it's not in your area anymore, right?
No, I'm not. I haven't been down in that area for close to 20 years now. Is
there an active amateur radio club in your area, and are you involved in it?
Yeah, the Littleton Amateur Radio Club, KLUB, makes the symbol, LARC, and that's the local club. But it takes me. They have a breakfast meeting on Sundays, once Sunday a month. But it takes me 2 hours to get there, so I have to have breakfast before I go get breakfast.
How about that? Are you really way out in the sticks?
Oh yeah, a mile up the road, the electricity stops. In fact, our border crossing, which is 15 miles north on Route 3 from here, they get their telephone and power from Canada.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. So when you say that the power stops there, you actually are responsible then for the power being brought to your house from that. That's the demarc out there on the street?
Well, it's further up the street. We're on a side branch up I'm on a side branch up here on the hill, and off the main line. But the main line stops about a mile up the road.
And how is it for amateur radio?
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. I have essentially no noise level here at all except atmospherics.
And when you were working at the Bell Labs and you were living close to the office there, how was the noise level there at that time? Is it a world of difference?
Oh, a world of difference. At times it was absolutely horrible. I had one instance where I was using packet radio on 2 meters. Every once in a while, this terrible buzz would come on and just completely wipe it out on 2 meters. And fortunately, the RFI mitigating fellow at the local power company was a ham also, and I got in touch with him and came out, and they tracked it down to a loose ground connection on a pole transformer just across the street from my property.
That's pretty amazing. What reflections do you have about looking back on 60 years of amateur radio in terms of its impact on your life and what it really means?
Well, I wouldn't have been able to get have the career I had and meet the people I met. I wouldn't have met my wife if it hadn't been for electronics and my getting a job at the Bell Laboratories. And that was quite a unique place. That place was at one point over 6,000 people were employed there.
In just that one location?
In just that one location, yes.
Now, did that Bell Laboratory, did that have the manufacturing there too?
No, that was just research and development.
As I remember, Western Electric was the manufacturing side of the Bell system.
That's correct. In the department that I worked in, the equipment that was manufactured was out in Montgomery, Illinois.
I see.
That's just south of Aurora. Well,
you just mentioned that you met your wife through amateur radio. Did she also work at the Bell Labs?
No, she was a young school teacher, and she had gone to teachers college with my cousin, who lived in the area down there. At one time, I was over visiting my cousin, and my wife popped in, and we got introduced, and eventually we went out, and well, the rest is history. And come to find out, I was staying in an apartment in Fairhaven, New Jersey, and she lived in Fairhaven. And after I met her and knew what kind of car she was driving, we went through the same intersection just about the same time every day.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
My son's a ham. He got his license
at an early age.
No, he got it after he graduated from school, and he now works for the state down in Concord, New Hampshire, the state capital, and he's in. He has to do with the communications department down there. But it's the digital PBX systems and Centrexes and all that stuff.
Do you communicate with him over ham radio?
No, I don't. He's too darn busy with the 3 grandchildren.
And any of them interested in ham radio? Do they show any interest when they come to visit?
Oh yes, my middle grandson, he's 11, and he is interested in electronics and logic. He has his own, microprocessors and things like that he programs, and he loves using, building things mechanical and also like that. And he has constructed crystal sets and things of that nature.
Now, has he brought any of those projects to his grandfather? Are you doing anything with Arduinos and microprocessors now? Well,
I happen to have a different kind of crystal set here that he has not built before. And last summer when he was here, we started on the construction of it. So, he's getting some pointers from UPA.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. What do you think are the greatest challenges facing amateur radio now, from your observation?
Challenges are, the main thing that really concerns me is the fact that fewer and fewer communities will allow amateurs to put up effective antennas.
And why do you think that is?
Well, it's a lot of the communities now are either gated communities or senior communities where they have
homeowners associations, yeah,
homeowners associations like that, and that I know my sister-in-law lives down in the villages down in Florida, and we visit there every once in a while, and I know a number of the hands there. But boy, the things that they go through to try and disguise their antennas are absolutely phenomenal. And
even with the natural disasters that go through Florida, there's not this awareness of the value of amateur radio. Do you think that the amateur radio community and its leadership spends enough time on public relations?
I think, from what I can see, they spend some time on it. I don't know whether it's enough, but the emergency preparedness and the RACES, thing like that, the ARRL has invested heavily in that, and now we have partnerships with with government entities, and there's a part of our LARC group up here. They have they're part of the hospital network up here. The hospitals in the area are all have got their own 2-meter stations and antennas and like that for emergency communications.
Are you involved in emergency communications in your area?
No, nothing organized like that. Again, the nearest hospital that's in the system is again about a 2-hour drive from here.
Are you near a town? Is there a clinic or anything like that near you?
Yes, there is a small community hospital in Colebrook, which is a 35-minute drive from here.
I see. So if you had an emergency, then you're at least close to some kind of trauma center.
Yes, and we have a very good EMS service up here, and also all the local EMS personnel and the police and the border patrol and like that are all designated first responders.
Is there an amateur radio, a 2-meter repeater or something like that you're able to get to from your place?
Yes, I am. There's one in Clarksville. I don't use it much, but there is one over in Clarksville, which is just a stone's throw from here. I can hit it with 50 milliwatts.
You're on top of a hill, right?
Well, I'm up on the side of a hill. I'm not at the very top, but close to it.
That hill favors the east? Talking to Europe?
East, south, and west.
Uh-huh. Oh, cool. What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
All the new innovations that are coming along, especially I read, even though I don't use it, I read about all the, like FT8 and JT65 and, all the different modes and like that, because it's digital, and that's what I was involved in at the labs was digital communications.
And there seems to be a very broad spectrum of ham radio activities that are now available to people who have amateur radio licenses. I'm curious because you've talked about how rural you are. How are you using the internet? How do you get to the internet from where you live?
Well, finally, at first in the 1990s, I was using satellite. It was called Starband, I think was the name of the company at that time. And then it eventually switched over to,
Hughes?
Wild Blue.
Wild Blue.
It was called Wild Blue. And used that. And then year before last, the local phone company put in DSL service and started out with that. And then I still have DSL, but now I have 25 megabit DSL, which is really good.
But to make a 25 megabit DSL work, it means that their equipment is really close to you, so that there's a cabinet or something like that within a few thousand feet.
The SLC 96 is just down the hill from me, maybe 900 feet, something of that nature. But it requires two phone lines to get 25 megabits.
Right. Okay. So they've got fiber to the cabinet there, and then you've got two copper pairs.
Right. That's the SLC. That's the SLC 96. That's where all the telephone lines in this area come out of there. And you're right. It's fiber to that cabinet.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, great. So you're one of the rural areas that's actually served by a wired internet provider. I read something recently that said that maybe 60% of America actually doesn't have wired internet service when you consider the size of the country.
Yeah, I was surprised that we got it here, but Fairpoint Communications is now called something else. Consolidated, it's called now. They were very instrumental in modernizing the telephone service up here.
Now, do you do anything on the internet as far as amateur radio? I mean, do you research projects? Do you have any do you have any other amateur radio activities besides operating HF?
Yes, I do have once a week on a Tuesday. I talk with a friend of mine down in West Palm Beach using CQ100, and this is like a regular amateur transceiver. You got to push the talk button on it like that, and you have a microphone, and it's all done over the internet. And in fact, this amateur that I talked with down there is K1LWC Art in West Palm Beach, and he is the first amateur radio operator I ever contacted when I was a novice.
So he was your very first contact, and you have a regular QSO with him every week.
That's right, via the internet.
Via the internet. Well, using a CQ100, is that a device that's readily available?
Well, it's a fellow that has this. You can look it up online.
I will.
That has this service, and you need to have an amateur radio license. He charges some modest amount per year, $49 or something like that per year to use it, and it really is a good way to keep in touch with somebody like my friend Art, who cannot, in his condo, he is not allowed to have anything in the way of antennas or transmitting equipment or anything like that.
So the CQ100 is a hardware device, or it's something on your computer, like a software interface?
It's totally software on your computer.
I see, and it has the look and feel of a remotely controlled transceiver. For example, it's like a simulation
exactly.
of an HF experience on your computer.
Right, exactly. You can take and select the different bands and whether you want to do it in CW or sideband or voice, and it, for all intents and purposes, it has a rudimentary transceiver front panel that you control with your mouse.
Okay, so for you to have the QSO with him, then he has to be on the same frequency that you're on, or can you call him just by call sign?
That's correct. We have a schedule every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. and on the same frequency that we talk to each other, whether you first contacted each other on in the novice band. Now it's allowed to be a phone band. 3742. That was the crystals we had. We both had the same crystal for some reason.
Okay, so you meet in your old novice hangout. So well, this is very interesting. So is it possible that there could be other people that could be adjacent? I mean, does it have the same sound as a single sideband in terms of the way the audio is processed, or?
It's a very, very clear audio. As long as you've got a good internet connection, it's like it's just very, very good quality.
What if somebody said, "Well, Mark, that's not amateur radio"? What would be your reply?
No, it's not amateur radio. But I'll tell you, when you
it's clever.
When you want to keep in touch, it's clever. When you want to keep in touch with somebody who that you have a long history with and like that, you use the same protocol and everything as you do on the ham bands. Same identification every 10 minutes and that kind of thing. Also, too, when I'm out mobile, I sometimes use Echolink, and that's sort of a hybrid, and that's a very interesting system also.
Do you have DMR in your car?
No, I have DMR here in the house, but not in the car.
Oh, I see. So you have a hotspot in your house, so you can walk around your house and talk on a DMR portable?
No, I have a DMR. I guess you'd call it a mobile rig. It's a Motorola, and it goes up to my vertical antenna of the collinear up on the top of the mast, and I have there are a number of the Clarksville repeater. There is a DMR system over there on that, and I can get into the system that way. Also, there's a Bandmeister, which is another type of DMR down on Cannon Mountain, down in Franconia, New Hampshire, and I can also work through that repeater.
Now, do you have a favorite talk group that you like to use?
I listen to the Northeast. That's the one that I listen to because that's where I'm mainly interested. But I have played around with some of the other talk groups, and in fact, I worked stations in Europe and like that on Echolink.
But not on DMR. You haven't tried any of the other talk groups on DMR. It's a little bit. I'm sure it's a little bit complicated with the Motorola, right? You've got to actually have to program the talk groups into the radio. Yes,
you have a code plug,
right?
And I've got it programmed for a bunch of the others, and I have used some of the worldwide, the worldwide talk groups.
Cool. What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Don't feel as though all this new stuff is so complicated and like that. It just takes time to learn it and to get involved with it. And also, using the digital modes is a great way to get yourself back into it, and like that. Because with a very modest antenna and low power, using FT8 and JT65 and like that, you can work a lot of stations.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday who says he has a 20 milliwatt whisper beacon that is heard around the world on 20 meters.
That's right. There's also a number of remote-controlled receivers and transceivers on the internet where you can, with your computer, you can get on and you can talk to stations via shortwave, but from a remote location.
Right, which is a great option if you're living in an apartment, for example, and can't have antennas in the apartment, or you're living in a retirement home, for example.
That's right.
Yeah. I think, was that remote hams?
Yes. There's also one that I use. There's a number of just receivers spotted all over the world. And at times, I do have a schedule with a fellow on 20 meters down in Florida. And a number of other friends of mine up here also check in with him. But in most cases, I can't hear them. So what I do is I take and use a remote receiver, an SDR receiver, over the internet, and I find one down in my friend's location down in Florida, and I can listen to the other sides of the conversation that I can't hear directly.
And you can hear yourself as well.
Yes, but I'm sure to turn off the audio. Otherwise, there'd be a wicked squeal.
No, it'd be interesting to actually hear how you sound from that end.
Yeah, I've listened on the headphones, and well, I don't know because I don't hear myself normally, so I guess it sounds like me.
Well, so I think that's a remote SDR. I'll put a link to that in the show notes page for this episode. Mark, I want to thank you for joining me in this episode of QSO Today.
You brought back a lot of memories.
Yeah, well, see, that's what it's all about. Mark, thanks so much. 73.
73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Mark. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WA2ILB in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.